What is up, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy, Jonald, and it's Wednesday, and you know what that means. It's time for a one-off. Pew, 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 pew. You know, someday, maybe I'll actually include air horn sound effects, and you won't know what to do, because you'll be like, Jonald, where's the air horns? Anyway, can't really see my wife. She's reading in the background, just hiding on the couch. But hello, wife. Hi, wife. She's not gonna respond. She doesn't need to. That's fine. It's time for Battlestaff Finale, baby. Yeah, of the two big finales that came out this week, there was Attack on Titan. Who cares? Battlestaff, let's freaking go. And unlike Attack on Titan, I can finish my things in a timely manner. Get friggin' wrecked, Attack on Titan. However, unlike Attack on Titan, I only have like 21 subscribers, and Attack on Titan has millions of consistent viewers. So, get wrecked, me. Anyway, yeah, final part of Battlestaff. Very excited. Talk about it more after. Let's get into the one-off.
Battlestaff, Part 3. Written by Jonathan Howe. Read for you by Daniel Howe. Float still didn't understand combat. Almost a decade after growing into a high level, they still didn't quite understand what drew humans to kill each other. "Henry, watch out!" they called. Henry, their bard and best friend, ducked the attack. He spun around to face the would-be attacker. Henry strummed, sending a flurry of low wind spirits towards the man. The Cassian soldier was blown off his feet, launched toward a wall. Float joined the spirits, twisting the man in the air so he landed on his neck, dying instantly. Float didn't feel any remorse for the action, but Henry hummed. Over the years, as if in response to Float speaking like the humans, Henry hummed and buzzed like a spirit. He still needed to work on his pronunciations, but anytime Float tried instructing him, Henry just grew frustrated. Still, Float knew what he meant. "We do what we must," Float buzzed back. Henry grimaced. "That doesn't mean I like it," he grumbled. Float's human had been struggling with their part in the war. If only he thought more like Vanessa, Float thought. Henry's human partner fought with much more conviction. She understood the spirit's plight. Float and Drift had communicated about the topic numerous times. They would work as hard as needed to stop the treachery of Kess. "We should go check on Ness and Drift," Henry said, using people words. Float agreed, moving in time with their human. Henry slung the Gitax, Float's gift to him, back over his shoulder as they jogged back to Vanessa's last known location. After all the years and the opportunity of better tech, Henry still clung to the instrument. Float thought they understood why. Even to them, the Gitax represented the bond between Henry and Float. "Much like those ear adornments Vanessa and Henry both wear," Float hummed to themselves. "What was that?" Henry buzzed back. "Nothing," Float replied in human. They often forgot Henry could understand their musings without needing to hear words. Thought and consciousness work differently outside of physical bodies. "And your onomatopoeia is getting better," Float hummed. This was directed at Henry. "I haven't been practicing or anything," he buzzed back. "Haven't had the time." "Still," Float responded, "you're clear. I bet in a few weeks you could communicate with Drift and Whim. Speaking of Drift..." The pair rounded a corner to a bloodbath. At the center of the bloodbath was Henry's human partner, Vanessa. A fiery song blasted out of her shoulder speakers, drawing a half-dozen low-levels. Drift, Vanessa's high-level companion, moved with the song, matching Vanessa's movements. They focused their power on her weapons, keeping Vanessa's left sword icy and right sword fiery. The pair was devastating. "Ness's favorite," Henry chuckled to himself in human. He unslung his Gitax, waited for a moment, then played to match the recording. Float moved with the music, gliding over to bolster Vanessa's physical strength. She turned and threw a quick smile at Henry before ending the rest of the fleeing Kessin soldiers. "Did you find our brethren?" Drift crackled. "We think we know their location," Float responded. Vanessa noted the conversation between spirits. She didn't have Henry's knowledge of Onopian, so she only picked up on Drift's side of the conversation. As all three moved toward Henry, Drift filled Vanessa in on Float's answer. "So where are we headed?" Vanessa asked Henry. Henry quietly played a sneaking song. Float used the magic to give the humans extra stealth. It had taken Float almost a year of being a high level to understand the irony. "Just around this corner," Henry explained. Float and Drift moved around first, checking to see if the coast was clear. It was not. A blast of Takat shrapnel tore through Drift. Float moved out of the way in the nick of time. The shrapnel lit up and pulled the other high level towards the machine. "Henry!" Float called, trying to imitate the human emotion of panic. It came out more like a crackling voice, but it accomplished the job. Vanessa ran out while Henry played a fighting song. Float joined her, blocking oncoming attacks so she could get in close. The Kessian soldier trying to wrangle Drift moved faster, but his panic was also his undoing. He slipped, giving Drift a moment to slip out of the restraints. Vanessa's swords flared with elemental energy. Henry now walked around the corner, surrounded by a small horde of low-level spirits. They had been waiting for someone to confront the generator. Now that Death's accompaniment was here, they took that chance. Kessian soldiers didn't stand a chance. Henry didn't have time to finish the second chorus before Vanessa had slain the last Kessian. Float, Drift, and all the low levels in the room crowded towards the generator. Sorry. You'll need to make a path," Vanessa called. "I can't see." Henry chuckled and plucked the strings. The low levels got the idea and moved away from the machine. Vanessa walked towards the containment door and broke the lock with a fiery sword. Whoosh! A torrent of spirits flooded out of the generator. Float twirled in delight, their brethren freed. Henry played a song of liberation, calling any hesitant spirits to leave confinement. Vanessa and Drift spoke quietly, Float picking up on Drift's words of affirmation. "I am perfectly fine," they told Vanessa. "I just don't want you to get caught is all," Vanessa explained. Drift tried to speak, but their grasp on human was not fully developed. Instead, they buzzed uncertainly. The lights dimmed, drawing everyone's attention to the back of the generator. Exiting the device was a high-level Takashin. It separated its parts into shooting stars, flying around the room in joy. Henry smiled, but it never reached his eyes. Float paid attention to their friend with concern. This was the portion of war Henry liked the most. "Why doesn't he smile so?" Float buzzed. Henry's eyes flicked their direction again. If Float had flesh, it would be red from embarrassment. "I can still hear you," Henry buzzed. "In Onopian to boot," Float replied indignantly. Henry snickered, the smile sneaking into his eyes for the moment. The high level reformed a central being before Vanessa and Henry. "Thanks," it said in accented human. "You're welcome," Henry hummed in Onopian. The high level made a fuzzing sound of shock. "This one is unique," it hummed to Float and Drift. "He is," Float agreed, humming as well. They knew Henry could still understand, but the bard held his tongue, as to not scare the Takashin. "Are the Kessians close?" Drift crackled with concern. The high level faced them, buzzing uncertainly. "I do not know," it responded with a hum. "I was used for an attempt, but I didn't have the aptitude." "The aptitude?" Float buzzed, sensing Henry's question. The temporary form of the high level fizzled away for a moment before returning. It crackled with anxiety. "They need a specific Takashin to achieve their goal," it crackled. "What kind of Takashin?" Henry asked, revealing his understanding. The high level crackled intensely and dissolved away, leaving without an answer. "Damn it," Henry muttered, this time speaking in human. Vanessa moved over and took his hand. "What's wrong?" she asked. Henry tried to look reassuring, but Float wouldn't have believed him either. "Henry, you tell me. None of this trying to protect me nonsense." "That high level was worried," he explained. "Quite worried," Drift chimed in. "Bad business." Vanessa's eyes flashed in understanding. "It's time for me to go home, isn't it?" she asked quietly. Henry's shoulders slumped. "I don't want you to, but Ness..." He trailed off, looking down at her abdomen. That was another part of humans Float didn't entirely understand. The drive to reproduce was unnecessary for spirits. Vanessa pulled Henry into a tight embrace. She held him while he cried. "What is this?" Float thought in human. As Henry wept, Float seemed to feel an oppressive force pushing down, trying to crush them and their friend. "Is this what Henry feels all the time? Is this feeling?" Float moved over to Drift. "Do you feel that?" "Nope." Drift hummed back in Onopian. Float didn't understand. They swirled out of their normal form, but the feeling was still there. Even more, something welled up inside Float. It was like the tiniest ember of something, but Float knew it was there. Before they had time to ponder, Henry's crying slowed. "We should report back to Beck," he told Vanessa. "They captured a high level?" Lieutenant Beck asked, incredulous. Henry and Vanessa nodded. Wim, Beck's companion, hummed back and forth with Drift, getting the details. "And believed the Keshians are getting close," Henry said. "Close to what?" Beck pressed. Henry made a weird noise, some imitation of a crackle. Human mouths weren't made for all the Onopian sounds. "In a human language, if you don't mind," Beck chided. Henry blushed. "I have my theories," he said sheepishly, "but I'd prefer they wait. He gestured to Vanessa and himself, "have something we'd like to discuss." "Vanessa can leave tonight," Beck said matter-of-factly, "but I need you at least through the end of the week." Vanessa's jaw dropped, but Henry merely smiled. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll discuss the details with you after seeing my wife off safely, if that's fine with you." Beck dropped the military air. "Henry, of course it's fine. You don't need to act so uptight about it. We all care about you two." She saluted, then walked off, Wim following close behind. Again, the oppressive, crushing force seemed to come over Float. They focused on Henry, who seemed to be collapsing into Vanessa. He didn't cry, but tears welled up. "I don't know what to do," he said. She stroked his hair gently. "Don't die," she said quietly, with a touch of humor. Henry laughed, which easily turned to sobs. "I'm scared and tired. Now you need to go home before me, and I'll be all alone." He cut off suddenly. "I mean, almost alone." Vanessa nodded. "It will only be for a few days. Besides, we've practically won. There's nothing to fear." Henry couldn't see it, but Float could. Vanessa was putting on a brave face, lying through her teeth. Still, it is what humans did in moments like this. They lied until the lie became truth. Float hummed softly. Once again, something tried bubbling up inside of them. They didn't know what to do, so the thing seemed to clang around before petering out. Then, as he was off to do, Henry sang. When he didn't understand the world or it felt too large to handle, Henry sang. Vanessa harmonized, with Drift joining in and calling other spirits to help. Float wanted to join, but something made them halt. Without reason, Float only listened and existed within the song. The next day, with Vanessa gone, Henry seemed hollow. Float did all they could to bring up his mood, but it didn't work. Besides, the feeling of weight was still there, as well as the bouncing energy inside Float. "You wanted to wait till today," Beck said, addressing Henry. "What are you worried about?" Henry took a deep, long, stabilizing breath. "I think they want Float," he said finally. Instinctively, Float fritzed with static. "Me?" they thought. "But why?" Henry grimaced, catching Float's question. "I think they're looking to evolve a Takashin beyond high level," he explained. "You are the most developed Takashin I've ever seen." "But is there anywhere to go after high level?" Beck asked. Henry didn't respond, only looking to Float. Float said in human, before reverting to buzzing. They weren't positive, Spirits didn't have culture or lore, ways to know of their own capabilities. Spirits just did things. It's possible, Wim chimed in, but unlikely. Henry is correct in his assessment of Float, though. Beck nodded slowly, putting the pieces together. So then, she said, what does that mean for you? Henry looked pale. The pressing force seemed to grow on Float. I don't know either. Bang! A shot rang out in the planning tent. Beck choked, a spurt of blood coming out. Henry's eyes went wide and he caught her. Shots whizzed by, taking Beck from behind. Henry cried out in pain as a bullet sailed through his leg. Float whizzed to them, trying to block the bullets. Without music, they couldn't do much. At the entrance to the tent was a small patrol of Cassian soldiers, led by a private from Beck's battalion. It means we don't need you anymore, the man said in a cold, calculated tone. He pointed a pistol at Henry, who cradled Beck's limp form. The man shot again, and Henry cried out. He lurched down, a bullet tearing through his abdomen. Stop! Float cried, trying to pull in as much power as possible. The oppressive weight inhibited them, and even worse, one of the gunmen aimed a Takat shot blast. Float tried to dodge, but the spray passed through them, anchoring them to the physical. A whirring sounded, and the Takat pulled back into the shot blast, taking Float with it. Honestly, we thought Vanessa would never leave, the traitor said, aiming the gun at Henry's head. Thank God she did, he said with a sad smile. One more shot reverberated through the tent. Float felt something then for the first time since growing to mid-level. They stopped perceiving the world. Float came to, so to speak, to the sound of screaming men. They were inside a Takat-lined container. No, they crackled. No, no, no! Float tried to pass through the side, but they were too corporeal. Besides, Takat was a material that interacted with spirits. Even as a low level, Float wouldn't have been able to escape. I'm trapped, they realized, the weight from earlier still pressing down. A moment passed before Float noticed. Why did I hear screaming? They tried to perceive outside of the container, but Takat blocked their ability to do so. Still, they heard more screaming. And chopping? They thought. Crash! The end of Float's container burst off. Float exploded from confinement. Outside, Float was in the middle of a raging battle. On the ground around them laid the bodies of Cassian spies. They all contained slash marks. The head of the traitor laid severed from the rest of his body. In the center of it all stood Henry. He was bloody all over, including a bullet wound directly between his eyes. Float rushed to him, enveloping Henry in power. They realized Henry had a speaker playing a song, only after being able to bolster him. You're not okay, Float buzzed. Henry panted hard. I couldn't, he said heavily. Let them take you. Henry collapsed to the ground. The speaker he was using crunched beneath his shoulder, the music stopping. Henry, Float crackled, I need a song. I can help you with it. Will I have a son or a daughter? Henry asked. He didn't try to speak in Onopian. Stay alive and find out, Float urged, speaking in human as well. They tried to plug up the wounds, but Henry's wounds were dire. You should go back and play in the garden with my child, Henry said quietly. And then, as he was off to do, Henry sang. He sang the song they both loved, a song between friends, of love and of loss. Henry jumped to the bridge, where it named the friend specifically. Float, yeah, it was all for you, Henry sang. The soul with the notes I play died in the cold blue. Float wanted to join in the song, but again, the weight held them down. Now there's 71 words remaining, he continued. That's all I'm saying. Is this all that was waiting for me? With a smile on his face and a song on his lips, Henry died. Float hung in the air. They didn't know how to react. For all the death they'd been surrounded by, Henry seemed to hurt. Float hurt. The crushing pressure started to eat away at Float's form. They crackled, fizzed, hummed, and staticked. Then finally, a noise no Takashin had ever made before. Float howled. The world seemed to shake. The force of sorrow combined with the weight Float had been battling for the last day. Now, everything fallen apart, Float let out a wail of despair. Henry was gone. His music was gone. And Float was alone. Spirit and men alike turned to face Float. "Henry!" Float screamed. The word rang out in human, but a static echoed in Onopian. The Kessian eyes went wide and they moved in Float's direction. "Why do they want his body?" Float thought frantically. "They don't," a part of them thought. "They want you." "Right," Float hummed, shrinking down, low over Henry's body. They perceived Henry's lifeless body. His eyes had glazed over. His lips stayed frozen in song. Float focused on the oncoming soldiers. They didn't want to perceive Henry anymore. It made them feel... It made me feel, Float realized with a start. Spirits don't feel. But Float did. Why did they feel? Ever since... Float opened up to the crushing weight they'd been avoiding. Almost like a black hole, Float condensed into a dense mass of indistinguishable energy. Then, bursting forth with great force, Float evolved. The light exploding out of them took a shape, humanoid. It was not technically matter, but it was physical. Float's body took on human features, all nondescript. When they opened their eyes, a single tear rolled down their cheek. "So this is what's beyond," Float said in human. "Some kind of hybrid. A grand Takashin." Around them, Kessians cheered. They seemed to believe Float evolving was a step towards their goal. They reached down, picking up Henry's Gitax. It had been damaged in the fighting, but Float could easily mend it. "Time to prove them wrong," Float hummed. Then they did something no other spirit had done before. The thing that had been trapped inside them combined with Float's newfound emotions and came out in a song. "But I only ever need to close my eyes," Float sang, picking up where Henry left off. They strummed. Despite never having played themselves, Float seemed to have muscle memory. Maybe they'd inherited it from Henry. Float performed their song, and the spirits listened. Power generators all over the battlefield burst open. Despite the Takat holding them in, Float's song empowered the spirits. They seemed to grow in strength the same way humans did when bards played. The Kessians were ripped to shreds. The other humans didn't need to do anything. The spirits just killed the men on their own. In moments, the battlefield was clear. Float's emotions were not. In an act that would later be remembered as the Vanishing, Float led spirits to free all their trapped brethren in the nation of Kess. Not even a newborn survived. Still, when those responsible were all truly gone, Float didn't feel better. They still felt hollow. "Float, sing!" the toddler commanded. Little Harold waddled around the small garden, playing with the bugs, plants, and Float. "Just this one more time," Float sighed. "You look just like him." They buzzed in Onopian. Float placed the Gitax, dulled when around Harold, in playing position. They held their fingers over the strings for a moment before starting their song. "Do me a favor, float gently away," they sang. "Just like the notes that you played." Harold hummed the tune. He'd heard it many times before. "And someday I'll join you But until that day, Henry, do me a favor and float gently away. Who's Henry? Harold asked. Float stopped. I've stayed too long, they thought. Time to go. He was a great man, Float explained, and my best friend. With that final sentence, Float dissolved from Harold's view. The child was getting too old. He was beginning to comprehend. Float left, giving Henry and Vanessa's child space to grow. Space to grow into his own person. As for Float, they wandered Malara, shaping the world with song.
And we're back. Yeah, I cried a bit while writing that one. You ever write something? Well, you probably don't if you're paying attention to this. Maybe you write things and you go, "Dang, that was necessary, but it hurt." Yeah, that. Whew. Whew. And you might be asking, "Hey, why were you so unnecessarily cruel?" I don't think I was. I think the way I wrote it, I needed, like, everything needed to happen in the way it did, so that, like, Vanessa had to leave, and a good reason for her to leave the battlefield is being pregnant. I actually did research on it, and she could have theoretically stayed for longer, but I know at about 4 months is when women really start showing most of the time. And, you know, it's really not worth it for someone who's a close combat fighter. Anyway, she needed to leave, and Kess is a country, well, was a country. They all gone now. Kess was a country that just needed Float and decided, hey, we need the most advanced, the most top-of-the-line one. And their spy, their traitor, was basically like, I'm not fighting Vanessa. That's not worth it. So Vanessa leaving gave them the perfect opportunity that they jumped on, because their whole idea was, if we can make a grand caution, we'll have so much, like, energy as a resource. What they didn't know is what a grand caution was, and that in accidentally sort of creating one, they literally killed their entire nation. So that was cool. But yeah, the other thing I really enjoyed about this one is if you thought that Henry was like the protagonist the whole time, which he kind of was, but again, it was really a dual protagonistship. So then I started writing this one, and I tried originally writing it from Henry's perspective, and it just wasn't working. The one thing I kept over was Henry's disdain at having to fight, because he liked music for sport and for bringing people together, and he felt like death's accompanist when he was playing in a war, which that's why I noted that their kind of group name changed. That's not what they became when Henry makes his own Battlestaff team. I never really decided that, but it'd probably be something like Henry and the Spirits or something like that. That wouldn't be a terrible name. But or like maybe the Spirit Wranglers. I don't know. They're just all of them after Henry and Float kind of made this artificial bond, learned to do the same, which is why there's Drift and Whim, and more of the people they knew also had high levels with them. So anyway, it was something that Henry, I did kind of write it from his perspective, but it just didn't feel right. But I knew the thing that I really wanted to happen was having Float evolve higher as a grant of caution. And so I was like, well, that can be from his perspective. Well, I say their perspective. I did that a lot. Float is technically a guy to me, but the spirits don't really have gender. And so I kept thinking his, but it's really they. I said it so many times to myself. Ooh, that's a yawn. Oh, goodness. But yeah, I hope you enjoy this one. I really did like it. I think, let me know in the comments if I should make a full, 45-minute long, just full episode that has everything in it. I think that might be fun. But otherwise, I'll see you next week just for a simple one-off, something that's not actually part of a 3-parter. Anyway, neat kid, bye.